I was standing beside the 12-foot champagne tower when my husband laughed and told his coworkers I should be grateful he had not traded me in for a younger model yet. Everyone around us chuckled nervously while a 23-year-old intern wrapped her manicured fingers around his arm. I smiled, lifted my wine glass, and watched his powerful boss suddenly freeze at the sight of me across the ballroom. 5 minutes later, my husband was sweating through his Italian suit while his entire career collapsed in front of 300 guests. Before we begin, please like and subscribe. Now, get comfortable and enjoy. My name is Vanessa Hale. I was 42 years old the night my husband decided to humiliate me publicly for entertainment. The party was held inside the Crystal Ballroom of the Beaumont Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. Gold chandeliers hung from 30-foot ceilings. The air smelled like imported roses, expensive perfume, and truffle butter from the catering trays moving through the crowd. Every guest carried either a crystal flute of Dom Perignon or a business card worth more than most monthly salaries. My husband, Ethan, loved rooms like that. He loved the attention, the fake laughter, the shallow compliments from people desperate to climb corporate ladders. That night, he wore a charcoal Brioni tuxedo that cost $7,000. I knew the exact price because I had purchased it myself 3 weeks earlier for his promotion celebration. His watch was a platinum Rolex Daytona I had given him on our 10th anniversary. The irony almost made me laugh later. At 8:15, Ethan had already consumed 4 glasses of Macallan 18-year scotch. I could smell the alcohol beneath his Tom Ford cologne every time he leaned close to whisper something cruel into my ear. "You could at least try to look younger tonight," he muttered while smiling at a vice president from his company. "Melissa from accounting is 50 and somehow looks 35. I adjusted the diamond bracelet on my wrist slowly. No reaction. That irritated him more. Ethan hated silence because silence meant he was losing control. For 12 years, I had built his confidence carefully. I handled our investments, managed our social calendar, edited his presentations before every board meeting. I even coached him before difficult negotiations. Ethan loved pretending he was self-made, but the truth was far less glamorous. Before marriage, Ethan had been drowning in $80,000 of debt while selling used medical equipment from a rented cubicle office. I was the one who rescued him. But men like Ethan never remember rescue fondly. Eventually, they resent the witness to their weakness. Across the ballroom, young women kept laughing at his stories while staring at his executive title instead of his face. Ethan mistook their ambition for attraction. I watched him touch one woman's lower back possessively, completely forgetting I was standing 3 feet away. That was the exact moment something inside me turned cold. Not heartbroken, not angry, just perfectly, dangerously calm. Finally, the strange thing about humiliation is that sometimes it sharpens your vision instead of breaking you. I stood near the champagne tower watching Ethan perform like a circus animal for executives half-drunk on money and ego. Every insecurity he carried leaked out through arrogance. Every joke became louder. Every touch lingered longer on younger women standing nearby. Then he crossed the line. A regional director named Simon asked how long we had been married. 12 years, Ethan answered casually, which is basically 40 in modern marriage years. A few people laughed politely. Ethan smirked and took another sip of scotch. "You know how technology gets outdated every few years?" he continued. "Marriage is the same. At some point, you start wondering if you should upgrade." This time, the laughter came slower, more uncomfortable. I noticed one woman lower her wine glass awkwardly. Another man cleared his throat and stared at the carpet. But Ethan loved attention too much to stop. He wrapped his arm around the tiny waist of the intern beside him. Her name was Kylie, 23, blonde extensions. Lip fillers so fresh the swelling had not completely settled yet. "Kylie here actually understands social media," Ethan joked. "Vanessa still writes things down in notebooks." Kylie giggled automatically. Poor girl looked terrified underneath the makeup. I smiled softly. Then I reached for my wine glass. That was when the ballroom entrance opened. Everything changed instantly. A tall silver-haired man stepped inside, surrounded by 2 security personnel and several executives rushing nervously beside him. Conversations dropped in volume almost immediately across the ballroom. Richard Lawson had arrived, CEO of Lawson Biotech. Net worth around $900 million. Ethan's boss. The man responsible for every promotion Ethan had spent years chasing. Richard rarely attended company parties personally. He usually sent pre-recorded speeches or appeared through video conference from New York or Zurich. Seeing him physically enter the ballroom caused visible panic among upper management. Ethan straightened his jacket immediately. His entire personality shifted within seconds. The loud arrogance disappeared. Now he looked eager, obedient, desperate. Jesus Christ, he whispered under his breath. Nobody said Lawson was coming tonight. I watched Richard shake hands with executives near the entrance. Then his eyes moved casually through the crowd and stopped directly on me. The color drained from his face instantly. For one strange second, the billionaire CEO looked genuinely emotional. Then he started walking toward us quickly. Not toward Ethan. Toward me. Ethan noticed immediately. His smile widened greedily. "Oh my God," he whispered excitedly. "He's coming over here." The executives surrounding us suddenly became alert like hungry dogs smelling meat. Richard stopped directly in front of me, close enough for me to notice the tiny scar beneath his chin. Same scar from 20 years earlier. His voice sounded quieter than expected. "Vanessa Mercer?" I had not heard my maiden name spoken aloud in years. I set my wine glass down carefully. "Yes," I answered calmly. Richard stared at me with disbelief. Then he laughed softly under his breath. "I cannot believe this," he said. "After all these years." Ethan immediately stepped forward with his corporate smile fully activated. "Sir, I'm Ethan Hale, Regional Operations Director. Vanessa is my wife." Richard barely glanced at him. Instead, his attention stayed locked on me. "You disappeared," he said quietly. "One day you were there, then suddenly gone." The room around us became painfully silent. And for the first time that night, Ethan looked confused instead of confident. Ethan looked between us rapidly, trying to understand why the most powerful man in his company was staring at me like a ghost from another life. I kept my expression neutral. Richard loosened his tie slightly and smiled in disbelief. "I searched for you for almost a year," he admitted quietly. Several executives nearby exchanged confused glances. Ethan forced out a nervous laugh. "Well, small world, right?" Richard ignored him again. "You left Boston without saying goodbye," he continued. "Your number disconnected. Your apartment emptied overnight." I felt the weight of old memories pressing against my chest. The tiny apartment overlooking Commonwealth Avenue. Cheap Chinese takeout containers. Sleepless nights surrounded by spreadsheets and investor proposals. Another lifetime. "I had my reasons," I answered calmly. Richard nodded slowly like he understood far more than he said aloud. Then Ethan made the worst mistake possible. He laughed and placed a possessive hand on my lower back. "Well, sir," he said proudly, "looks like my wife had quite the secret social life before settling down." The sentence hung in the air like poison. Richard's expression changed instantly. Not anger. Disgust. Cold, surgical disgust. His eyes moved toward Ethan's hand, still resting on my back. Then toward me again. "You're married to him?" Richard asked carefully. Something about his tone made Ethan straighten defensively. "Yes, sir," Ethan answered quickly. 12 years. Richard stayed silent for several seconds. The ballroom noise faded into distant murmurs around us. Then Richard asked me a question that shattered Ethan's confidence completely. "Does he know what you built?" Ethan blinked. "What she built," he repeated awkwardly. I looked directly into Ethan's eyes for the first time that night. And suddenly I understood everything. He never told them about me. Not really. Not the truth. To everyone at Lawson Biotech, Ethan presented himself as a self-made corporate genius who climbed from nothing through hustle and determination. He probably described me as a supportive wife who organized charity lunches and hosted dinner parties. Safe. Decorative. Forgettable. Richard gave a soft laugh filled with disbelief. "My God," he muttered. "He really has no idea." Ethan forced another smile, though sweat had started gathering near his hairline. "Sir, I think there may be some confusion." "There's no confusion," Richard interrupted sharply. The executives nearby became completely silent. Richard turned toward them calmly. 20 years ago, Lawson Biotech was 3 weeks away from bankruptcy, he said. Banks refused additional financing. Our acquisition deal collapsed. Investors were pulling out daily. Several older executives nodded carefully. They knew the story. What they did not know is the rest. Richard looked at me again. This woman rebuilt our entire financial recovery structure in 72 hours. Ethan's face froze. She created the debt restructuring model that saved the company, Richard continued. At 22 years old. Now people openly stared at me. Even Kylie. Especially Kylie. I remembered those nights vividly. Sitting barefoot on cold hardwood floors with legal paths spread around me. Running cash flow projections until sunrise. Rewriting investor packages while Richard panicked beside me. Back then, Richard was not a billionaire. He was just a terrified 30-year-old founder trying to keep his company alive. You were an analyst? Ethan asked slowly. Richard laughed once. Analyst, he repeated. Vanessa practically built the foundation this company still operates on. The silence afterward felt enormous. Ethan's hand slipped away from my back immediately. And for the first time in our marriage, I watched genuine fear enter his eyes. Not embarrassment. Fear. Because suddenly he realized something horrifying. He had spent 12 years insulting a woman whose intelligence exceeded every executive in that ballroom combined. Ethan recovered quickly. Men like him always do. Their survival depends on performance. He forced out a laugh loud enough for nearby executives to hear. Well, apparently my wife forgot to mention she secretly saved a billion-dollar company. A few people smiled politely. Nobody else laughed. Richard continued staring at Ethan with visible contempt. You should listen more carefully when intelligent women speak, he said coldly. That single sentence sliced straight through Ethan's ego. I saw it happen physically. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared slightly. But he could not retaliate. Not against the man controlling his salary, stock options, bonuses, and future promotions. So instead, he turned toward me. Confusion mixed with irritation behind his eyes. Why had I never told him? The answer was simple. Because he never asked. During our marriage, Ethan loved hearing himself talk. About his meetings, his strategies, his ambitions. Every conversation eventually circled back toward him like planets orbiting a sun. And honestly, I let him believe the illusion. It made life easier. At least initially. Richard gestured toward a quieter section near the balcony overlooking downtown Chicago. Would you walk with me for a moment? He asked. Before I answered, Ethan interrupted quickly. Actually, sir, there are several senior directors waiting to greet you near the stage. Richard looked at him slowly. I'm aware. The silence afterward felt brutal. Ethan stepped back immediately. I followed Richard toward the balcony while hundreds of curious eyes tracked us across the ballroom. The city lights shimmered below through massive glass windows. Snow drifted softly outside over Michigan Avenue traffic. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Richard exhaled heavily. You look happy, he said quietly. I am now, I answered. The word now caught his attention immediately. His eyes sharpened. What did he do? Direct. No hesitation. Same Richard as 20 years earlier. Always cutting straight toward the wound. I leaned against the balcony railing calmly. He forgot who paid for his first apartment, I said softly. Then he forgot who negotiated his first business loan. Then he forgot who rewrote his presentations before every promotion interview. Richard's expression darkened. And eventually, I continued. He forgot to respect me at all. Inside the ballroom, Ethan kept glancing toward us repeatedly while pretending to socialize. I could practically feel his anxiety from across the room. Richard followed my gaze. He's been using company funds improperly, he said quietly. I turned toward him slowly. Interesting. Richard lowered his voice further. 3 months ago, internal audits flagged irregular entertainment expenses connected to Ethan's department. Luxury resorts, personal dining, unauthorized transportation charges. I said nothing. Normally, we handle issues discreetly, Richard continued. But tonight tells me this may be larger than accounting violations. There it was. The icy clarity. That strange calm women reach when betrayal finally becomes undeniable. Not emotional anymore. Just analytical. I thought about the unexplained withdrawals from our joint accounts over the past year. 40,000 here. 12,000 there. Ethan always blamed market fluctuations or temporary transfers between investment portfolios. I remembered the receipts hidden inside his jacket pockets. Hotel charges in Miami. Jewelry purchases I never received. Restaurants I had never visited. Suddenly the math became very simple. How much? I asked quietly. Richard studied my face carefully. Approximately $380,000. I did not react outwardly. But inside, something clicked permanently into place. $380,000. Enough money to destroy a marriage. Enough money to expose a man completely. Richard reached into his suit pocket and handed me a small white business card embossed with silver lettering. Private direct number. Not corporate. Personal. If you need help, He said carefully, "Call me before he realizes what's happening." Then he looked back toward Ethan one final time. "And Vanessa?" "Yes. Whatever you decide to do next," Richard said quietly, "make sure you finish it completely." I did not confront Ethan that night. That was the first thing that terrified him. Most people expect explosions after betrayal. Screaming, crying, broken dishes thrown across marble kitchen floors. Ethan expected drama because drama would have given him a chance to manipulate the situation emotionally. Instead, I became calm. Calm is dangerous. On the drive home, Ethan talked nonstop. He gripped the steering wheel tightly while snow hit the windshield in soft white bursts beneath Chicago streetlights. "Why didn't you tell me about Richard?" he asked for the fourth time. I stared out the passenger window quietly. "You never asked." "That's not fair, Vanessa." Interesting choice of words. Not surprise. Not curiosity. Fairness. Meaning he already understood the power imbalance had shifted violently against him tonight. The silence inside the Mercedes became suffocating. Finally, Ethan laughed nervously. "Well, honestly, tonight might actually help my career," he said. "Lawson obviously respects you. Networking matters in this company." There it was. Even now, his first instinct was self-interest. I turned toward him slowly. "Did you sleep with her?" The car drifted slightly before he corrected the wheel. "What?" "Kylie." His jaw tightened immediately. "Jesus Christ, Vanessa. She's an intern." Not an answer. I asked a simple question. Ethan exhaled dramatically. "No, obviously not." Lie. I smelled the lie instantly. After 12 years together, I knew every version of his voice. The defensive one. The arrogant one. The guilty one. This was guilt. When we arrived home, Ethan headed upstairs while pretending nothing had changed. Our house sat inside Lakeview Heights behind private security gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. 6 bedrooms. Heated marble floors. A kitchen renovation costing $140,000. All purchased carefully through strategic investments. My investments. At midnight, Ethan finally fell asleep beside me after another 2 glasses of whiskey. I waited 27 minutes. Then I got out of bed. The house felt perfectly silent except for the faint hum of central heating and Ethan's uneven breathing behind me. I walked downstairs barefoot and opened the hidden drawer inside my office desk. Inside sat a silver external hard drive. Emergency records. Every financial statement from the past decade. I plugged it into my laptop slowly. Then I started digging. By 3:14 in the morning, I already knew 2 things. First, Ethan was absolutely sleeping with Kylie. Second, the affair was the least damaging thing I discovered. The charges appeared gradually once I compared company expense reimbursements against our personal accounts. Duplicate hotel stays. Corporate dinners overlapping with private transfers. Fake client entertainment receipts. Sloppy. Very sloppy. Men become careless when arrogance convinces them they're untouchable. Around 4:20, I uncovered the real problem. A shell consulting company called Kestrel Strategic Holdings. Registered in Delaware 8 months earlier. The sole owner was Ethan Hale. Over $200,000 from Lawson Biotech had quietly flowed into that account through fabricated vendor invoices. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Corporate fraud. Not workplace misconduct. Not an affair. Felony-level fraud. My pulse remained steady. That frightened me slightly. No anger anymore. Just calculation. I opened another file. Property transfers. That was when my stomach finally tightened. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had secretly met with a divorce attorney. He had already started preparing asset protection documents. Draft versions included language challenging my entitlement to several shared investment portfolios. There were even notes suggesting I had been financially dependent throughout most of the marriage. Dependent. I actually laughed aloud. The sound echoed through the dark office. After everything I built. After every deal. Every negotiation. Every sacrificed opportunity. He planned to erase me completely while stealing company money behind my back. Upstairs, Ethan slept peacefully believing he still controlled the story. He had no idea I was already planning the ending. The next morning, I made Ethan breakfast exactly the way he liked it. 3 eggs scrambled softly with chives. Sourdough toast brushed lightly with Irish butter. Fresh black coffee from the expensive Italian machine he bragged about constantly to guests. He looked relieved when he walked downstairs. Relief is another form of arrogance. He thought one quiet night meant forgiveness. "You're up early," he said cautiously. I couldn't sleep. That part was true. I slid his plate across the marble island calmly. Ethan studied my face carefully while sitting down. You're not still upset about last night, are you? Upset. Such a small word for betrayal. I smiled faintly. Should I be? His shoulders relaxed instantly. And there it was again. Arrogance. Men like Ethan always mistake composure for weakness because they cannot imagine a woman controlling her emotions strategically. He took a bite of eggs. I was drunk, he muttered. I probably pushed the jokes too far. Probably. Interesting. Then he added the sentence that destroyed the final piece of our marriage permanently. You know how insecure women can get about aging. I almost admired the stupidity. Almost. Instead, I poured myself coffee and sat across from him quietly. Did you mean what you said about upgrading? Ethan groaned dramatically. Vanessa, come on. It was a joke. But jokes usually contain truth. He rubbed his forehead impatiently. You're being sensitive. Sensitive. That word again. The favorite weapon of mediocre men confronting intelligent women. I watched him check his phone repeatedly during breakfast. Every few minutes, a tiny smile appeared at the corner of his mouth before disappearing again. Kylie. Probably texting him. By 9:15, Ethan left for work wearing a navy canali suit and pretending everything remained normal. He kissed my cheek mechanically before walking out the front door. The second his car disappeared through the security gate, I got to work. First, I called my attorney, Margaret Sinclair, partner at Sinclair, Voss and Durham, the kind of divorce attorney wealthy men fear privately. Margaret billed $1,100 per hour and was worth every cent. She answered immediately. Vanessa, she said warmly, this must be serious. You never call before noon. I need a postnuptial asset freeze drafted today. Silence. Then her tone sharpened professionally. What happened? Corporate fraud. Infidelity. Attempted asset concealment. Another pause. How much money? At least $380,000 confirmed so far. Margaret inhaled slowly. All right, she said calmly. Do not confront him. Do not warn him. Send every document you have immediately. I already organized the files. Of course you did. That almost made me smile. For the next 6 hours, I built a timeline so detailed it could survive federal prosecution. Every transfer. Every suspicious reimbursement. Every hidden account connected to Kestrel Strategic Holdings. By afternoon, Margaret called back sounding impressed. Vanessa, she said carefully, this is devastating. Good. I also found draft divorce documents, I added. He planned to challenge my ownership claims. Margaret actually laughed. That would fail catastrophically, she said. Most of your marital assets originated from your investment structures before his salary increased substantially. Exactly. Ethan never understood our finances because I intentionally handled everything myself. Taxes, trusts, real estate holdings, brokerage allocations. He enjoyed spending money far more than understanding it, which meant he also never realized one critical detail. Almost every major asset in our marriage was legally protected under my private holding companies, including the house, including his beloved Mercedes, even the Rolex. At 4:30, I received another phone call. Richard Lawson. I had compliance run deeper audits this morning, he said quietly. The fraud exposure may exceed $600,000. I closed my eyes briefly. Even better. And there's something else, Richard continued. Your husband has been telling executives he expects a vice presidency within 6 months. I leaned back slowly. How unfortunate for him. Richard laughed softly. Then his voice turned serious. When are you planning to move? I looked toward the front windows as snow continued falling quietly outside. Soon, I answered. But first I want him comfortable. How comfortable? I smiled coldly. Comfortable enough to destroy himself completely. For the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect wife. That was the trap. I smiled at Ethan's jokes, cooked his favorite meals, listened patiently while he bragged about upcoming promotions and executive meetings. I even pretended not to notice the increasing number of late-night strategy sessions keeping him away from home. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Every lie, every transfer, every affair-related expense. Margaret helped me obtain private forensic accounting reports through legal channels so airtight Ethan would never see them coming. The evidence became overwhelming quickly. Hotel bookings in Miami under fake client names. Jewelry purchases totaling $48,000 delivered to an apartment leased secretly for Kylie downtown. corporate reimbursements connected to fake pharmaceutical consulting dinners that never happened. And then came the recordings. Ethan loved hearing himself speak. That weakness became useful. One Friday evening, he stumbled home drunk after a private executive dinner at Gibson's Steakhouse. I helped him upstairs carefully while he rambled about office politics and incompetent coworkers. Then he said something fascinating. At 4:30, I received another phone call. Richard Lawson. I had compliance run deeper audits this morning, he said quietly. The fraud exposure may exceed 600,000. I closed my eyes briefly. Even better. And there's something else, Richard continued. Your husband has been telling executives he expects a vice presidency within 6 months. I leaned back slowly. How unfortunate for him. Richard laughed softly. Then his voice turned serious. When are you planning to move? I looked toward the front windows as snow continued falling quietly outside. Soon, I answered. But first I want him comfortable. How comfortable? I smiled coldly. Comfortable enough to destroy himself completely. For the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect wife. That was the trap. I smiled at Ethan's jokes. Cooked his favorite meals. Listened patiently while he bragged about upcoming promotions and executive meetings. I even pretended not to notice the increasing number of late-night strategy sessions, keeping him away from home. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Every lie, every transfer, every affair-related expense. Margaret helped me obtain private forensic accounting reports through legal channels so airtight Ethan would never see them coming. The evidence became overwhelming quickly. Hotel bookings in Miami under fake client names. Jewelry purchases totaling $48,000 delivered to an apartment leased secretly for Kylie downtown. Corporate reimbursements connected to fake pharmaceutical consulting dinners that never happened. And then came the recordings. Ethan loved hearing himself speak. That weakness became useful. One Friday evening, he stumbled home drunk after a private executive dinner at Gibson's Steakhouse. I helped him upstairs carefully while he rambled about office politics and incompetent coworkers. Then he said something fascinating. And Ethan walked inside believing he still controlled his future. I wore a black silk Valentino dress with a low open back and diamond earrings Richard once gifted me after Lawson Biotech survived its first acquisition war decades earlier. Ethan noticed the earrings immediately. I haven't seen those in years, he said suspiciously. I stopped wearing them after marriage. He frowned slightly, but said nothing. Interesting. Because suddenly he understood those earrings represented a version of me he never truly knew. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom filled with executives, investors, and board members. Ethan moved confidently through conversations while I observed quietly beside him. Then Kylie arrived. She wore an emerald dress so tight it looked painted onto her body. Ethan's eyes followed her instantly across the room before he caught himself. Too late. I noticed. So did Richard. From across the ballroom, Richard watched Ethan carefully with the expression of a man studying a ticking bomb. Good. Everything was ready now. The legal filings were scheduled electronically for midnight. The compliance investigation package would hit Lawson Biotech's board members at 8 the following morning. And Ethan still had absolutely no idea his entire life was about to collapse publicly within hours. At 9:12, Ethan made his fatal mistake. The jazz band had just finished a slow Sinatra cover when several executives gathered near the rooftop bar discussing next quarter expansion plans. Ethan stood in the center of the group holding a glass of 18-year Yamazaki whiskey like he already owned the company. Kylie hovered beside him smiling carefully. I remained several feet away speaking with one of Lawson Biotech's attorneys when I heard Ethan laugh loudly. You know, he said, my wife still thinks relationships should work like they did in the 90s. A few men chuckled weakly. Ethan kept going. Meanwhile, younger women actually understand modern ambition. His hand brushed lightly against Kylie's waist. Subtle, but not subtle enough. One executive shifted uncomfortably. Another looked toward me nervously. Then Ethan delivered the sentence that destroyed him forever. Honestly, he laughed. At some point, every man wants something newer. That's biology. Silence spread instantly around the rooftop lounge. Because this time, Richard Lawson had heard every word personally. He stood directly behind Ethan holding a crystal tumbler in one hand. The expression on his face looked almost disappointed. Not angry, just profoundly disappointed. Ethan turned slowly and nearly dropped his drink. Sir, he stammered immediately. Richard glanced briefly toward Kylie. The poor girl looked ready to faint. Then Richard focused entirely on Ethan. "How old are you?" he asked calmly. Ethan blinked. 46. Richard nodded slowly. "And you believe aging only applies to women?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Ethan forced a nervous smile. "I was joking." "No," Richard replied quietly. "You were revealing character." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Nearby conversations stopped completely as executives realized something catastrophic was unfolding publicly. Richard stepped closer. "Do you know why Lawson Biotech survived when larger companies failed?" he asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "No, sir. Because intelligent people built it. Loyal people protected it. Disciplined people respected sacrifice." Richard's voice remained calm, controlled, deadly, and weak men were removed quickly. The color drained from Ethan's face. I watched panic finally enter him fully now. Real panic. The kind that tightens throats and destroys confidence from inside outward. "Sir, if I offended Vanessa, I can apologize. This has nothing to do with offense." Richard interrupted him sharply. "It has everything to do with integrity." Then Richard turned toward the surrounding executives deliberately. Effective immediately, he announced, "Ethan Hale is suspended pending internal financial investigation." The rooftop exploded into stunned whispers instantly. Ethan stared at him in horror. "What investigation?" Richard said nothing, which terrified Ethan even more. "You can't be serious," Ethan whispered. "Oh, I'm very serious." Richard reached into his jacket calmly and handed Ethan a sealed white envelope. "Corporate suspension notice." I recognized Margaret's law firm courier stamp beneath it. Ethan's hands started shaking visibly. "This is insane," he snapped suddenly. "I've done nothing wrong." That was my cue. I stepped forward quietly and handed him a second envelope. Thicker, cream-colored. My divorce filing. Ethan looked between the envelopes in disbelief. Then at me, finally understanding. "You knew?" he whispered. I held his gaze steadily. For quite a while. His breathing became uneven. "You're doing this because of some stupid affair?" Affair. Still minimizing everything. I almost pitied him. Then I remembered the draft documents calling me financially dependent. "No," I answered softly. "I'm doing this because you underestimated me." He opened the divorce filing frantically while executives watched in complete silence around us. Emergency asset freezes. Property restrictions. Financial disclosures. Forensic audit requests. His face turned gray line by line. "You froze the accounts?" he whispered. "Most of them." The tiny emphasis on most nearly broke him. Because suddenly he realized the horrifying truth. He did not actually know where our money was. And for the first time in 12 years, Ethan Hale understood he had never been the one in control. Ethan's eyes moved wildly across the legal paperwork while executives pretended not to stare openly. But everyone was staring. The rooftop suddenly felt smaller. Hotter. Dangerous. "You can't freeze marital assets without notifying me first," Ethan snapped desperately. Margaret's voice answered from behind him calmly. "Actually, she can." Ethan spun around so fast he nearly lost balance. Margaret Sinclair stepped onto the rooftop wearing a white wool coat over a navy designer suit. Two associates followed beside her carrying leather document cases. Ethan looked genuinely sick now. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Margaret offered him a polite smile with absolutely no warmth behind it. "Good evening, Ethan. What the hell is this?" "A very expensive mistake on your part." Several executives quietly backed away, sensing legal warfare unfolding in real time. Margaret opened her folders smoothly. Earlier today, the court approved emergency protective orders concerning concealed marital assets, suspected corporate fraud proceeds, and attempted financial misrepresentation. Ethan stared at her blankly, then at me, then back at the paperwork. "You planned this," he whispered. I tilted my head slightly. "You planned it first." That landed perfectly. Because he knew it was true. Margaret continued professionally. "Additionally, forensic accountants have already secured copies of all transfers connected to Kestrel Strategic Holdings." Ethan froze completely. There it was. The real fear. Not divorce. Prison. "How do you know about that company?" he asked weakly. Richard answered this time. "Internal compliance flagged it weeks ago." Ethan's mouth opened slightly. He looked trapped now. Cornered. Like an animal slowly realizing every exit disappeared hours earlier. "I can explain," he said quickly. "Those transfers were consulting reimbursements. From a shell corporation registered to your home address?" Margaret interrupted. Silence. One of the board members nearby quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Nobody was defending Ethan. Nobody. Because corporate executives understand one brutal truth better than anyone. The second someone becomes toxic, survival matters more than loyalty. Ethan looked toward Kylie desperately. Huge mistake. Richard noticed immediately. So the intern was worth it, he asked coldly. Kylie's face went white. I didn't know about any fraud, she blurted instantly. Of course she didn't. Fear destroys loyalty faster than betrayal ever could. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. You told me you loved me. Wrong sentence. Wrong audience. Several executives actually winced physically hearing it. Kylie stepped backward immediately. I'm 23, she whispered shakily. You said you were separated. Another devastating mistake. The rooftop exploded into whispers again. Ethan's entire body stiffened. He turned toward me slowly. I can fix this. The arrogance was finally gone now. All that remained was desperation. I studied him carefully. This man once cried tears of gratitude when I paid off his debts 12 years earlier. He promised loyalty forever while holding my hands across a cheap diner table at 2 in the morning. And now here we were. Strangers. No, I said softly. You can't. Margaret handed another document toward him. Federal investigators will likely contact you within 48 hours, she said professionally. You should retain criminal counsel immediately. That sentence shattered him completely. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. Someone behind us quietly muttered, Holy hell. The live jazz music had stopped entirely now. Even the staff froze nearby, pretending not to listen. Ethan looked at Richard with watery eyes. Please, he whispered. Don't do this publicly. Richard stared at him for several long seconds. Then he answered with absolute calm. You humiliated your wife publicly, he said. Why should your consequences happen privately? Silence. Pure silence. Ethan turned toward me one final time. And for the first time in our marriage, he truly saw me clearly. Not emotional. Not broken. Not dependent. Just cold. Strategic. Finished. His voice cracked slightly. You were waiting for me to destroy myself. I smiled faintly. No, Ethan, I answered quietly. I simply stopped interrupting you while you did it yourself. 3 months later, Ethan was living inside a one-bedroom rental apartment above a dry cleaner in Naperville. The unit smelled permanently like starch and cigarette smoke from neighboring tenants. The elevator broke twice weekly. His luxury suits disappeared one by one to cover mounting legal fees. Kylie vanished almost immediately after the investigation became public. Apparently, eternal love has limits when federal fraud charges enter the conversation. Lawson Biotech terminated Ethan officially 11 days after the rooftop confrontation. The board released a carefully worded statement regarding serious ethical and financial violations. Industry recruiters stopped answering his calls within days. White-collar business circles are brutal that way. Nobody hires scandal, especially aging men who publicly humiliate their wives before stealing company money. Federal prosecutors eventually negotiated a settlement to avoid trial. Ethan surrendered substantial assets, accepted financial penalties, and narrowly escaped prison through cooperation agreements connected to other compliance issues inside the company. But financially, he was ruined. Completely. The Mercedes disappeared first. Then the Rolex. Then the country club membership he loved bragging about. By the time divorce proceedings finalized, Ethan retained less than 8% of what he once believed belonged to him. Meanwhile, the truth about our marriage emerged publicly through court disclosures. Turns out I was never financially dependent. Quite the opposite. For the first time in years, I laughed without exhaustion behind it. Real laughter. Healing laughter. The kind that arrives after storms finally pass. Sometimes people ask whether revenge brought me satisfaction. Honestly, no. The satisfaction came from clarity. From finally understanding my value without needing someone else to recognize it first. Ethan believed youth mattered more than loyalty. Appearance mattered more than sacrifice. Ego mattered more than integrity. And in the end, those beliefs cost him everything. As for me, I stopped shrinking myself to protect insecure men. I built a beautiful life instead. Quiet mornings, honest friendships, peaceful dinners beside the ocean. Financial freedom untouched by anyone else's arrogance. And every now and then, when the sunset turns the water gold outside my balcony, I think about that rooftop night in Chicago. The exact moment a man mistook kindness for weakness and paid for it with everything he had. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you would have done. 6 months after the divorce finalized, Ethan tried contacting me again through mutual friends. Not to apologize. Not to take responsibility. He wanted help. Federal restrictions had destroyed his ability to work inside medical technology management. Several civil lawsuits connected to shareholder losses were still active. His attorney fees alone exceeded $400,000 by then. Apparently, humiliation becomes unbearable once creditors start calling every morning before breakfast. I ignored every message. One evening, Margaret forwarded me an email Ethan had accidentally sent to her office instead of his accountant. Attached was a spreadsheet listing everything he still owed: credit card balances, legal settlements, tax penalties, delinquent rent payments. Turns out experience becomes very valuable once people stop underestimating you. My mornings became simple afterward. Coffee on the terrace overlooking the Pacific. Financial calls ending before noon. Long walks beside the water without anxiety sitting permanently in my chest. Peace stopped feeling unfamiliar eventually. Then came the final twist. Nearly 8 months after the rooftop confrontation, Lawson Biotech hosted a private charity gala in San Francisco. Richard invited me personally as a guest speaker discussing women in corporate finance. I almost declined. Then curiosity won. The ballroom overlooked the bay with enormous glass walls reflecting city lights across polished marble floors. Wealthy investors drifted between silent auctions and champagne stations while cameras flashed near the entrance. And standing near the back wall wearing a rented tuxedo 2 sizes too large was Ethan. For one strange second, neither of us moved. He looked older instantly. Not physically old. Defeated old. His shoulders slumped slightly now. The confidence was gone completely. I walked toward him calmly. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Neither should you." His eyes lowered immediately. "I came to apologize." "No," I answered softly. "You came because you miss access." That one hurt him. Good. He swallowed hard before speaking again. "I really did love you." I studied his face carefully. Maybe he believed that. Maybe some version of him once did. But love without respect eventually rots into possession. And possession was all Ethan ever truly wanted. "You loved what I provided," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." Tears gathered in his eyes embarrassingly fast. "I ruined everything." Finally, an honest sentence. I glanced around the ballroom once before looking back at him. "No," I said calmly. "You revealed who you already were." Then I walked away while cameras flashed near the stage and the orchestra began playing softly beneath the lights. And for the first time in my life, leaving someone behind did not feel tragic. It felt like freedom. The ocean breeze outside suddenly smelled sweeter than ever. A year later, I stood inside my renovated office overlooking the Pacific while sunlight poured across white oak floors and silent computer screens tracked international markets in real time. Mercer's strategic capital had grown beyond anything I originally planned. 47 employees, 3 regional offices, clients flying in from London, Singapore, and New York requesting private meetings months in advance. Success became strangely quiet after surviving chaos. No screaming. No proving anything. Just peace. On certain mornings, I would still remember the woman standing beside that champagne tower in Chicago while her husband mocked her publicly for aging. I barely recognized her anymore. Not because she was weak. Because she tolerated disrespect for too long. That was the lesson nobody teaches women properly. Loyalty without boundaries becomes permission. One afternoon, Richard visited my office carrying 2 coffees and an expression I immediately recognized. "What happened?" I asked. He handed me a tablet silently. An article filled the screen. Former Lawson executive files personal bankruptcy after fraud scandal. Beneath the headline sat a recent photo of Ethan exiting a courthouse, wearing a wrinkled gray suit and exhaustion carved deeply across his face. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not sadness. Nothing. Richard studied me carefully. You really moved on completely, he said. I looked out toward the ocean. Yes, I answered honestly. That's the part he never believed possible. Because men like Ethan assume they remain unforgettable. They mistake dependency for devotion. They believe the woman they diminished will always keep looking backward. But healing changes your vision. Eventually, you stop replaying the betrayal. You start appreciating the escape. That evening, after Richard left, I walked barefoot onto the terrace carrying a glass of wine while waves crashed softly below the cliffs. The sky turned deep orange over the water as sailboats drifted slowly toward the horizon. My phone buzzed once beside me. Unknown number. I ignored it. Some doors deserve to stay closed permanently. I leaned back in the chair and breathed in the cold, salt air peacefully. No manipulation. No humiliation. No shrinking myself to protect fragile egos. Just freedom. Real freedom. And honestly, that turned out to be the greatest revenge of all. People still send me messages asking whether I would change anything if I could relive those 12 years again. The answer is no. Every insult revealed something important eventually. Every betrayal forced me to remember my own value. And every moment of humiliation became fuel for the life I built afterward. Karma rarely arrives through speeches or instant punishment. Sometimes karma simply removes the mask from someone arrogant enough to destroy themselves publicly. Ethan lost his reputation, his money, his future, and the illusion of control he worshipped so desperately. Meanwhile, I gained something more valuable. I finally learned never to apologize for my strength. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Let me know in the comments what you would have done.